Did I quit my job to make indie games? So recently, I made a video about how I quit my full-time job at Google and how I joined a startup called Stash.gg. And this startup is in kind of the game development space, but not working at an actual game studio. Now, as much as I would love to be able to make games fully independently, I do not have the funding for that. But anyway, I had roughly 2 weeks of free time before my next job, so I got real into work on my indie game Castlemancer and made a ton of progress. Buckle up because I'm about to go through some rapid fire changes that absolutely made my game feel and play way better. First, I actually implemented a gameplay flow. I know that kind of sounds weird and maybe a little late, but beforehand I just had all of these disparate parts that weren't really connected, so I connected them. So it goes from the welcome screen tutorial to the overworld to the battle phase, then back to the overworld. I added some basic dialogue capability for lore and thematic reasons in between the fights. Now, since my game is a bit of a mix between deck builder and Age of Empires type strategy, the layout of the enemy actually really matters. Mostly because you are physically dragging spell cards into the world to target certain locations. I tried procedurally generating these locations, but it usually looked super weird and not natural. So instead, I created a bunch of pre-established formations, and during battles, depending on how the battle is going, the enemy can shift in between and out of these different formations to keep the feel dynamic. One of the cooler things I added, I'm calling bonus buildings. Basically, these buildings provide turn buffs to the enemy units, such as bonus damage, bonus armor, magical attacks, or more max health. So you as the player can destroy these buildings with your spell cards, but you don't have to. If you just want to rush down the enemy, you can entirely focus on the actual enemy units instead of the buildings, but if it's a tougher or larger army, keeping them buffed for too long might make it harder or the battle just lasts longer. One of the other key features of Castlemancer besides spell cards are summon cards, which essentially allow you to summon different units or buildings into the battlefield. Now, I did a lot of work to try and readjust the fighting logic of these summoned troops, which turned out to be trickier than I thought. Basically, if you summon a unit, let's say on average it might have 5 health. Now, if this little guy just runs directly into the enemy army, he's just gonna get absolutely obliterated in 1 second because all the enemies will just auto attack him once and kill him. So one approach was just to give summon units a lot more health, but ultimately that didn't really feel great. What felt a lot better and honestly more thematic is what I'm calling a dueling mechanic. Basically, enemy troops will only engage up to 2 units against a player summoned unit. So let's say there's a bunch of enemies running past a player unit. Now, if they see that there's already 2 fighting that player unit, then they won't even bother and just continue to attack the castle. I felt like this matched better with large fight scenes you kind of see in movies and TV shows, where a character charges into a battle, but they're not just instantly getting hit 40 times. They kind of like, pick out a couple different enemies to engage with at a time. I'll have some different methods to like raise or lower this depending on how you want your build to go, but this solution just felt much better. Another problem I ran into was that at any given time, I wasn't sure which units to target. Some had more health, damage, and defense than others, especially with this bonus building effect. So I added a hover tooltip effect, similar to something you might see in like a Total War game with their unit panels. It just shows the unit's health, armor, attack, and any special effects. Also, it has their name and associated house, which is just like a little flavoring for lore to feel like you're actually fighting armies instead of just nameless things. In addition to this tooltip approach, I also revisited how the difficulty scales as you progress further. To do this, I actually analyzed data I did from a playthrough of Slay the Spire to see how enemies' health scaled based on the number of encounters. So I distilled that down to a similar type algorithm for the total health of the army in my game. But what's cool is that this scaled health and damage is then distributed pseudo-randomly across the different units, essentially making each encounter completely different, as sometimes certain melee will have more health or more damage, or the range will have more health or damage, creating a ton of randomly generated encounters while still adhering to the general scaled difficulty. I've also changed the lore of the game a little bit. Previously in Castlemancer, you were the headmaster and you were enrolling students at your magical school, and these students effectively granted you the cards and bonuses you'd be playing with. Now, this started to feel a little too convoluted and made presenting loot and rewards more of a headache and confusing, because let's say you just won a battle. You'd get to enroll a new student, and that student would then, let's say, give you the spell Fireball. Now, from a UI perspective, this was just super annoying because would I display the student or the benefit they were bringing, which would then cause me to add a bunch of extra tooltips to further explain the benefit and so on. So I repositioned to where you as the player are training to become a new Castlemancer. So you're tasked with helping to protect the various kings and queens of the realm. Basically, instead of enrolling new students, you just are the student. And the loot and rewards you get from winning are literally just the cards or relics directly. So ultimately removing one layer of abstraction and making everything a little easier to understand and present visually. But let's be honest, game development is hard, not only from the actual programming side, but also just from the project management side. So I've recently been trying to better utilize Notion to help with that. And this video's sponsor, Skillshare, really helped with that. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across tons of areas that are super valuable for game development, like UX design, illustration, animation, 3D modeling, marketing, and even just general productivity. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. Also, Skillshare has been ramping up their platform with new features and classes. New members are asked to share a little bit about their interests, and from there, Skillshare immediately surfaces recommendations tailored to their goals. For example, for me, I selected things like game development, productivity, and marketing. The class I recently started was Ali Abdal's Notion Masterclass. I'm a big fan of his YouTube channel. I think he is an absolute great teacher. I really like his delivery, and on Skillshare, he uploads these super long multiple-hour productivity guides that are not really available elsewhere. So the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial over on Skillshare, so get started today. And thank you to Skillshare for supporting the channel. Now that's basically all the stuff I was able to build in that short 2-week time frame, and now the game is really coming together. In terms of what's next for my priorities, the main one is to add many more spells, units, and relics, as I've mostly just been playing with the initial test ones. So most of the functionality is there, I just have to actually create the content. I want to add some more unique encounters instead of just battles for the upcoming demo, similar to like Slay the Spire's shop or random events, just to add some extra flavor. I also need to add some localization support for the dialogue events, which I realized was a little bit more challenging than I thought it was going to be. And the last major thing is the progression outside of the game. So in many roguelikes, every run you do, you make a little bit of progress in the game as a whole to unlock new characters, spells, or passives. So I definitely want to be able to add that. Now that's not super necessary for the demo, as the demo is just going to basically display some of the core gameplay, and will primarily probably just be one character, but it's still definitely important. So please wishlist Castlemancer over on Steam, as it really helps me out, and let me know what you thought of the video. My name is Michael. We do a bad British accent at the end of every video. Let me know what you guys thought about the video. Wishlist Castlemancer over on Steam because it really helps me out, and hopefully I see you in another one. Bye-bye.